Could you give us a bare minimum of how much of that 18 billion you suspect will turn out to be fraud?
I think a significant portion.
America, the Minnesota fraud scandal just went from bad to catastrophic. Federal prosecutors now estimate that $9 billion, that's $9 billion, have been stolen from Minnesota's social services programs. 6 new suspects just got arrested. The House Fraud Committee is withholding whistleblower tips from state investigators because they don't trust them. Minnesota is pausing enrollment in multiple state programs because the fraud is so widespread they can't control it. And here's the kicker. Timmy Tampon Walsh, the guy who let all this happen on his watch, just announced that he's gonna run for another term. Who's gonna vote for this guy? Oh yeah, the Somalians who've been stealing billions in taxpayer money.
U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson eventually revealed that he thinks half of that $18 billion spent on those 14 different programs in Minnesota was illegitimate.
What is up, guys? Tyson Dela Cruz here. Thank you so much for rocking with me. We've been following this absolute disaster in Minnesota for months now. If you want to check out everything we covered on this scandal, click the link above or in the description down below. But this, my friends, this is the biggest government fraud case in American history, and it just keeps getting deeper and deeper like an endless pit of Somalia fraud. Let me break down just how catastrophic this fraud has become. Joe Thompson, the lead prosecutor in these cases, just revealed that he estimates half of the $18 billion spent on 14 different Minnesota social services programs was, get this, fraudulent. That is approximately $9 billion in taxpayer money stolen. Thompson says he doesn't make these generalizations in a hasty way.
When I look at the claims data and the providers, I see more red flags than I see legitimate providers. And overwhelmingly so.
Think about what this means. The lead federal prosecutor is saying when he reviews the providers in these programs, he sees more fraud than legitimate operations. These 14 programs are now deemed high risk for fraud, exploded in growth over the last few years, just like the Feeding Our Future meal fraud case situation that essentially was a canary in the coal mine. What we see in Minnesota isn't just a handful of bad actors committing crimes. It is a absolutely staggering industrial scale fraud. And the arrests just keep coming. 6 new suspects now face fraud charges as part of a widespread government fraud scheme. The U.S. Attorney's Office announced new charges just this week. These are people who were running systematic fraud operations across multiple programs.
Learning startling new details tonight as 6 new suspects now face fraud charges. 14 state social services programs have cost Minnesota $18 billion.
And now, miraculously, amazingly, Timmy Tampon Walsh wants to run for another term. What is this doofus absolutely thinking here? Timmy Tampon, I do not know how you get out of this one, broski. You've been governor while $9 billion was stolen from taxpayers. You defended the programs even as fraud was exposed. And now you think Minnesota's going to give you another term? The only people, in my opinion, that's going to vote for this guy are the Somalians who've been benefiting from this fraud the entire time, because everybody else in Minnesota is watching their taxpayers get stolen while the governor makes excuses and refuses to take responsibility.
Well, let's just continue this conversation here, because also today the U.S. Attorney's Office netted a guilty plea from a defendant.
We're also seeing guilty pleas now. The U.S. Attorney's Office just got a guilty plea from a defendant who admitted her role in combination of the fraud schemes. Asa Hassan, you may remember that name. She was the first defendant charged with defrauding Minnesota's publicly funded autism care program. Now here's where the scandal gets even more corrupt. The Minnesota House Fraud Committee is withholding whistleblower tips from the Department of Human Services investigators. And the reason why is absolutely damning. They don't trust them.
Where are hundreds of tips of fraud involving taxpayer-funded programs going?
The House Fraud Chair revealed today that they are not being handed over to state investigators.
House Fraud Committee Chair Kristen Robbins said whistleblowers who reach out to them within the department are absolutely terrified. That's why the tips haven't been shared with the Department of Human Services investigators. To date, They have not shared them because there is absolutely no trust.
Whistleblowers who reach out to us within the department are terrified.
Chair Kristen Robbins says that's why tips haven't been shared with the Department of Human Services investigators.
And to date, we have not because there is no trust.
Think about what this means. The people inside the Department of Human Services who are trying to blow the whistle on fraud are so scared of retaliation that they won't go to their own agency's investigators. They are going to the House Fraud Committee instead because they know DHS will either ignore them or punish them for speaking out. Robbins explains what happens when she gets credible allegations of fraud from whistleblowers. They meet with them, they interview them, and then they send the tips to the U.S. Attorney's Office, not to DHS. The U.S. Attorney is one of the places she sends tips to because she can't trust the state agencies that are supposed to be investigating this fraud in the first place.
What does happen?
When I get credible allegations of fraud from whistleblowers, we meet with them, we interview them.
Robbins added the U.S. Attorney's Office is one of the places she sends tips.
DFL members are furious about this.
When you share with the with the Inspector General, they can shut off payment. The U.S. Attorney and the OLA can't. So as it relates to taxpayer dollars, if there are credible allegations that need to, even atomized, need to go to the Inspector General, and you are not turning them in, it actually means that you are preventing payments from being stopped.
The U.S. Attorney and the Office of Legislative Audit cannot do that. But Robbins fired back with a perfect response.
Why you don't trust the people on the other side of the room to investigate these whistleblower tips?
Because they have had the power to investigate for at least 7 years, longer. And the whistleblowers come to me after they've already been to the department, after they've already been to the Attorney General, and they've generally been ghosted.
The fraud, my friends, has gotten so bad in Minnesota. Minnesota is now pausing enrollment in multiple state programs. They literally cannot control the fraud anymore. So essentially, they're shutting down new enrollment to try to stop the bleeding.
Allegations of fraud in Minnesota are mounting.
Today, state officials say that they expect to pause enrollment for even more state programs.
Earlier this month, the U.S. Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services sent a letter to Governor Timmy Tampon Walz asking that DHS stop all new provider enrollments for the 14 programs deemed high risk for fraud or risk losing federal Medicaid funds. So the federal government is threatening to cut off Minnesota's Medicaid funding if they don't get this fraud under control. Minnesota announced they would stop licensing new adult daycare providers for at least 2 years because there was a 43% uptick in providers compared to just 7% increase in people needing those actual services. My question is, how do you get established as an adult daycare provider in the first place if there's nobody that you need to take care of? DHS Inspector General James Clark said he expects similar programs enrollments to be put on pause to comply with the feds. He suggests the legislator consider changing requirements for all DHS programs billing Medicaid to get ahead of the fraud before it actually happens, like requiring providers to show actual need for the services before getting licensed. Minnesotians are so fed up with the fraud that they started a grassroots letter writing campaign demanding accountability. They're writing to the state agencies asking pointed questions like which specific officials and managers have been disciplined, resigned, or removed because of documented oversight failures. This is a good question.
These are my lovely stockings.
From a nurse in Woodbury.
I am liberal politically.
To a retired airport worker.
Oh, I'm a Republican. We are all darn disgusted. We are furious.
Minnesotians on both sides of the aisle are sick and tired of hearing about fraud in state-run programs for food, housing, and disability services.
Who's going to be fired for this? Who's going to take responsibility and stop passing the buck?
In a fraud special covered a few months ago, Governor Tampon Tim Walz says that.
So look, we do have new leadership over there. People have been removed.
But the reasons of those departures were never clear. We know the previous Education and Human Services commissioners both stepped down. An assistant commissioner at DHS also left the post. But nobody will say whether they were fired for the fraud failures or just decided to leave on their own. That, my friends, says is not accountability. That is a cover-up. The fraud isn't just limited to social services programs. There's also massive education fraud scandal where Somalian immigrants are getting federal student loans without showing any identification, guys. Secretary of Education Linda McMahon is laying the smackdown on the fraud.
What we have done in looking through the entire program of the federal student loan program, and we had found, and there was a large concentration of it in Minnesota, those universities where students were applying for federal loan, they were not required to show any kind of identification to prove who they were.
Think about that. You get a federal student loan without proving your identity. That is not a program, is it? That's an invitation to commit fraud. And now the State Department is making it clear that this fraud is grounds for citizenship revocation.
Well, ultimately, I refer to law enforcement authorities for specifics, but what I can say from the State Department's perspective is that we have instituted policies when it comes to our visa policies that make sure that when someone comes to this country, the taxpayer will not be on the hook for that person. A public charge rule to make sure that we're looking at a whole host of different factors to make sure that someone comes here does not end up just relying on benefits, is actually someone that is going to assimilate and contribute, in addition to a whole other range of factors.
If someone is here on a visa and they violate the terms of that visa, if they break the law here, that is grounds for revocation. They're not going to tolerate people who abuse immigration laws or break the law. He said that they're going to take action and address it. Now, we talked about this a few videos ago, but it's worth mentioning again because it connects directly to what's happening in Minnesota. HUD Secretary Scott Turner released a report linking unchecked illegal immigration to the housing crisis and specifically called out the fraud in Minnesota. The report found that increased immigration has driven up housing prices. We already know this, straining the market and pricing out Americans. An estimated 15 million illegal immigrants constitute 30% of all foreign-born residents. And nationally, the foreign-born population account for over 60% of the growth in the rental demand. Turner said we had over 12 million people coming over our border unchecked and unvetted. This is straining our housing market from a supply standpoint and from an affordability standpoint. And in Minnesota specifically, you have a Somalia population that's been gaming the system, stealing billions in benefits and driving up housing costs for everybody. This all connects. The open border policies of the Biden administration allowed millions of people to enter our country. Many of them ended up in places like Minnesota, where they immediately figured out how to exploit social services programs. And now American taxpayers are paying twice, once for the benefits that are being stolen, and again through higher housing costs because of the increased demand. Minnesota is experiencing the largest government fraud scandal in American history. $9 billion stolen from 14 different social services programs. 6 new arrests this week. The House Fraud Committee withholding whistleblower tips because they don't trust state investigators. Programs being paused because the fraud is so widespread that they can't control it. And Governor Tampon Tim Walz, who let this happen, wants to run for another term. The lead federal prosecutor says that when he looks at providers in these programs, he sees more red flags than legitimate operators. Whistleblowers inside DHS are terrified to report fraud on their own agency. Minnesotians are writing letters demanding to know who's been fired for these failures, and the federal government is threatening to cut off Medicaid funding if Minnesota doesn't get this under control. But here's what nobody in Minnesota's government wants to admit. This wasn't an accident or an oversight. This was a deliberate choice to prioritize political correctness over protecting taxpayer money. They knew the fraud was happening. Whistleblowers were reporting it, but they were more worried about being called racist than stopping Somalian immigrants from stealing billions of dollars. And now Timmy Tampon Walz thinks he can run for re-election like none of this happened. The only question is whether Minnesota voters are stupid enough to give him another 4 years to finish bankrupt in the state. Let me know what you think about this. Drop it down in the comment section down below. Smash the like button if you kindly would. Share, subscribe, and as always, guys, I'll catch you on the next one.